good land opportunity? I mean, how, when we're thinking about, certainly not my method, which is like, oh, that's interesting, or, I think climate change was a good strategic play here, but you're obviously looking at much larger deals than where I might build a house. So when you're evaluating, and certainly as you're allocating and deciding what are the great deals, how are you looking at land? Can you give us a little bit of some behind the scenes of how you look at that?
Yeah, sure. So we do it in a very specific way. So there's a couple of layers to it. So the first thing is, as a private equity firm, we're looking for big problems to solve, right? So problems that are sustainable, because we don't want to put a lot of effort into deep diving into strategy, building the ecosystem, building infrastructure around that strategy for only a couple years. So hopefully it's something that we can work on for 5-10 years or beyond. So did you know that currently there's actually a deficit of 4.8 million single-family homes in America? So this was partly because of the pent-up demand from the last financial crisis. So that's why we have so many homes in deficit. So that means that we have to keep building. So all the big home builder companies I mentioned, a lot of the public companies, D.R. Horton, for example, $35 billion annual revenue company backed by Warren Buffett. At that kind of scale, guess how many homes they actually build per year? You think probably a couple million, right? No, they built 90,000 homes last year. Yeah, so do the math. It's like 4.8 million of homes in deficit. If companies like D.R. Horton can only build, not even breaking 100,000 homes per year, it takes the top 50 to be building at their capacity about 10 years to catch up. So it's insane. It's a really big problem. So the way we invest in land, we do it in a very specific way. There is 0.0 speculation involved.
Wow.
Climate change is very much on my mind as well. But the way we do it is that, so I don't know if you guys know this, but if you're a public company, you don't actually want to own land. So if you're a D.R. Horton, you're a landlord, you don't want to own land, because ownership of land while you're working on land development, which is two parts, either land entitlement or horizontal development. So while you own the land to work on these things, that actually shows up as a liability on your balance sheet. So it really screws up your financial ratios. So it's not great for a public company. That's why they outsource the land development to other players, right? And it's a very, very small, tight-knit group of mostly men. I'd say 99.9% men. So I actually am very lucky, because as a partner in my private equity firm, part of my job is to be constantly scouting for new strategies. And I happen to have met one of these, interesting land developers, but, stand-up person like your husband. And so he actually told me about the land development space, and I got very curious, and so that's when my firm decided to go in, and we took about 8 months to study strategy. So the way we do is that, because the way that land development work, the land developers actually wait for phone calls. Like, a lot of times they have multi-decade long relationships with these home builders, public companies. So they actually get calls from let's say, a D.R. Horton, and then D.R. Horton would say, okay, hey, land developer, we have this piece of entitled land that we want to build a master community on, right? So we want to build 1,000 homes. We are not going to do the land development. Can you actually do the horizontal development on this land? But we're going to pay you $70,000 per lot once it's done. And so that PSA, the purchase and sales agreement, is signed on day one. So on day one, before the land developer does anything, they already know how much profit they're going to take.
That's
so
amazing.
It's an insane business model where the exit is actually built into the day one. Find me another business model that does that. You and I know each other from Entrepreneurs Organization. I've been a serial entrepreneur for 16 years. I have not seen many of these, if any. So it's a very interesting way of getting involved in real estate.
All right, let me push it further. So we're all here going, oh my gosh, we need to figure out how to do this, or how to get involved with this. Obviously, private equity is a different ballgame than it is, putting money in the stock market. And sort of, can you help us understand, how we might be able to think about taking advantage or becoming a part of something that can yield these kinds of returns.
Yeah, for sure. So I think a couple of the speakers on the previous panel talked about alts, right? So when we're talking about investments, there's different asset classes. And I mean, I'm personally diversified as well, just like everybody else. So I have my share of stocks and bonds and you know, this and that. And so one area that's not very often talked about, and I think, you know, we can all benefit to learn more about, it's the space of alternative investments. So that's basically alternative because it's everything but the mainstream, right? So this is private equity funds, it's venture capital funds, it's private credit funds, everything. And so, I mean, specifically, if you're interested in the strategy I just described, we do have a fund. So I manage a fund that's based on this land development thesis. I'm happy to talk to you if you want to know more about that. But I think generally speaking, it's just, I think if you're hearing that people are doing interesting things, I mean, just talk to everybody, right? I do that every day still, right? So I'm very curious to learn about, oh, how are you getting a return? Oh, what do you guys do? And how do you structure a thesis like that? So it's just, you know, learning, continue learning, ask some questions.
What's your minimum investment?
Yeah, so we work with, we're a 506c fund, which means that we only work with accredited investors. So that's minimum is 100,000.
Got it. Thank you. Great question, Chen. Yeah, I think
We're gonna get in.
I bet everyone during our first break is gonna be like, so Alice, how can we do more? Now, one of the things I think is fascinating right now is, you know, we spoke with